One sip sealed his fate. But who poured it? Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're tuning in from. I love seeing this community grow. Your comments make every mystery more alive. Let's begin. If you've ever watched a man try to sell a bulldog a bone it doesn't want, you've got a fair picture of my afternoon. Nero Wolfe was in his chair, buried behind a copy of the Orchid Growers Quarterly, pretending that nothing on earth could disturb the sacred peace of his brown stone. I, on the other hand, was keeping the accounts, a pastime only slightly less thrilling than counting raindrops on a tin roof. That's when the bell rang. Fritz, punctual as sunrise, went to answer it. The man at the door, a barrel in a pinstripe suit, had the kind of mustache that thought it was in charge. In his hands was a heavy wooden crate stamped Toscano Imports, handle with care. He insisted, with the sort of authority that doesn't come from customer service training, that it was for Mr. Nero Wolfe. Fritz brought in the crate like it was an unexploded bomb, which wasn't far from the look on Wolfe's face when he saw it. "What is that?" Wolfe demanded, lowering his magazine with the precision of a judge delivering sentence. "Delivery for you," I said. "Looks like the wine fairy came early." Wolfe frowned, deep and deliberate. I ordered no such thing. The delivery man shrugged. "Instructions were clear, sir. Hand deliver to Nero Wolfe. Paid in full, signature required." That last part did it. Wolfe never signs anything he doesn't understand, and certainly not for free liquor. But curiosity is the one temptation that can outduel his laziness. He waved a pudgy hand. "Set it down, Archie." The man left with Wolfe's scowl at his back and my tip in his pocket. I found a crowbar in the kitchen and cracked the crate open. Inside was a velvet-lined compartment containing 6 bottles of what even I could tell was top-shelf Chianti, aged, dusty, expensive enough to make a collector blush. Nestled between the bottles was a cream-colored envelope embossed with a gold seal bearing a lion's head. I handed it to Wolfe. He slit it open with his ivory-handled knife, read the note once, and his lips compressed into a thin, unsatisfied line. "Well," I said. He passed the card to me, to Nero Wolfe, with gratitude and anticipation, from Don Cesare Montelupo. I whistled low. "The Don? As in Montelupo Imports, Montelupo Wines, Montelupo with the mayor in his pocket." "The same," Wolfe said curtly. "A man who understands commerce, but not courtesy." He sniffed the nearest bottle, his expression caught between reverence and restraint. He sends wine unbidden, and with it, obligation. "Pfui." "Maybe he just wants you to try his vintage," I offered. "A goodwill gesture." "Goodwill," Wolfe said, "is the currency of deceit." He leaned back, eyes closing in thought. "Return it." "Return it? To Montelupo?" "Certainly. And include my compliments, though not my company." I was halfway to the phone when the bell rang again. This time, the visitor wasn't delivering anything. She was collecting trouble. A tall woman in a black coat stepped into the hallway, her perfume making a quick deal with the air. Her voice, when she spoke, was cultured but strained. "Mr. Wolfe? I must speak with you. It's about Don Montelupo, and it's a matter of life and death." Wolfe's eyes opened. He studied her with that slow, carnivorous calm that made grown men wish they'd worn armor. "Madame," he said, "you've already disturbed my peace. You may as well explain why." She stood in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she'd come to hire a detective or confess to one. The black coat clung to her frame, more out of tension than tailoring. Her gloved hands twisted around each other as if she were wringing a decision dry. Fritz hovered at a respectful distance, and Wolfe's eyes had narrowed to their evaluation setting, the one that could turn a man into a report in 5 seconds flat. "Your name, madam," Wolfe said, each syllable landing like a stamp of bureaucracy. "Lucia Montelupo," she answered, her accent shading the vowels. "I'm the Don's daughter." That earned her more attention than a bottle of Burgundy. Wolfe sat straighter, though his bulk barely shifted. I could practically hear his thoughts creaking into place. "Sit down," he said. "You mentioned life and death. Clarify which is imminent." She took the red leather chair, the one usually reserved for clients who didn't yet realize they were suspects. Her posture was proud, but her eyes darted around the room at the rows of books, the orchids, the silent judgment of order that made chaos confess. "My father received threats," she began, "for weeks now. Notes, phone calls, even—" She hesitated. "Even a dead bird left at our doorstep. My father dismissed them, but this morning something changed." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured, gesturing toward the crate. "He sent me wine." Lucia blinked. "He did? Then it's already begun." Wolfe's brows lifted, and I took mental notes the way a man keeps tally at a poker table. "Explain," Wolfe said. "My father doesn't send gifts," she said. "Not without purpose. He believes every gesture should mean something, either loyalty or warning. If he sent you wine, it's because he expected danger, and he thought you were the only man who could stop it." That earned her a long silence, the kind Wolfe uses instead of applause. He folded his hands and closed his eyes briefly, as if rearranging thoughts into a filing cabinet. Archie Goodwin's inner narrator, yours truly, was already connecting dots. A power broker, enemies, a preemptive gift to a detective who hates favors. It spelled trouble in 12-point type. Wolfe finally said, "Miss Montelupo, I'm not a bodyguard, nor an arbitrator in family melodramas. Why would your father presume my involvement?" "Because he trusts no one else," she said, her voice trembling now. "He's afraid. My father met with someone last night. He wouldn't tell me who. This morning he locked himself in his study. I left to attend an appointment, and when I returned an hour ago, he was gone. Vanished. His guards claim he left with no word, no escort, no car. Just disappeared. I'll admit, I've heard my share of stories that start with, 'he disappeared,' and most of them end with, 'we found the body.' But Wolfe didn't flinch. 'You came here directly?' he asked. 'Yes. His secretary said he'd arranged a delivery to you.' That was all she knew. Pfui. Wolfe exhaled. Theatrical nonsense. The man's alive. Lucia looked at him as if he'd just announced the weather. "How can you know that?" "Because dead men don't send me wine," he said simply. "Nor do they vanish without trace when they have unfinished intentions. A man like your father acts. He doesn't flee." Wolfe leaned back, thinking. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes, sir?" "Fetch the card." I handed him the embossed note again. He studied it a moment, then asked Lucia, "Did your father ever use the phrase gratitude and anticipation?" She blinked, startled. "Yes. He used it when finalizing a deal or arranging one he believed was already won." Wolfe nodded slightly, like a man confirming the temperature of a fact. "Then your father did not fear for his life. He was preparing a transaction, and he intended to involve me, perhaps as instrument, perhaps as pawn." Lucia stood abruptly. "If that's true, then he's been betrayed." Wolfe's eyes opened, sharp as razors. "Perhaps. Or perhaps he was the betrayer. In either case, Miss Montelupo, you have involved me by crossing my threshold." That was Wolfe's version of a contract. I offered her a glass of water, which she declined with the grace of a woman used to refusing smaller comforts. Her expression was firming up, resolve replacing fear. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "my father isn't innocent, but he's my father. If someone's taken him—" Wolfe raised a hand. "If someone has taken him, Miss Montelupo, he has permitted it. I shall determine why." That ended the preliminaries. He rang for Fritz and ordered beer, which meant he was shifting into thinking mode. While the amber bubbles foamed in his glass, I fetched my notebook. "You will go to the Montelupo residence," Wolfe instructed me. "Observe, discreetly. Speak to the secretary, the guards, anyone who saw him last. Take particular note of what remains. His desk, his correspondence, his telephone logs. There will be something that doesn't fit." "Right," I said. "And if I bump into someone who doesn't want to talk?" "Then you will listen more closely," he said, not looking up. Lucia watched us with the kind of anxiety you could pour into a cup. "Mr. Wolfe, please, if there's ransom, if this is some scheme—" He cut her off. "I deal in truth, not charity. If your father's absence inconveniences criminals, I shall not mourn their discomfort." That wasn't comfort, but it was honesty. She accepted it with a nod. When she left, the air in the room felt heavier. Perfume, tension, and something unspoken. Wolfe was silent for a long minute, eyes closed, hands steepled. "Archie," he said finally, "I dislike this." "Then why take it?" "Because," he murmured, "a man who sends me wine unbidden is either flattering me or challenging me. Either is intolerable." That was my cue. I grabbed my hat and headed for the door. As I left, Wolfe's voice floated behind me, cool and absolute. "Report by 6, and Archie, do not drink the wine." I was halfway down the steps before I realized the unspoken truth. If Wolfe was right, and the Don's gift was bait, I was already holding the line that led straight into the trap. The Montelupo residence was the kind of place where even the curtains looked expensive enough to sue you. A mansion in the East 60s, all marble steps and imported arrogance, with a doorman who could have doubled as a fortress wall. I gave him my name, and the magic words, "representing Nero Wolfe," got me through the door like an honorary diplomat. Inside, the air was heavy with polish and money. A woman in black silk, her expression set to mourning but managing, introduced herself as Elena Rossi, the Don's personal secretary. She had the kind of efficiency that could catalogue grief if it came with an appointment. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, leading me toward a study that looked like it had never been used by anyone who did their own typing. "I've told Miss Montelupo everything I know." "Tell me again," I said. "I'm slower than she is." She hesitated, then shrugged. "The Don came in at 10 last night after a private meeting at his office downtown. He went directly to his study. Around 11, I brought him correspondence for signature. He was unsettled. I asked if he wished to postpone the morning schedule. He said no, that things were in motion." "What kind of things?" She looked at me with eyes that measured risk. "Business. The Don was expanding beyond imports, something involving foreign partners. He didn't tell me details." "And this morning?" "I arrived at 8. His car was still in the garage, his coat on the stand, but the study door was unlocked and empty. His desk," she gestured toward it, "was exactly as he'd left it." I took a slow look around the study. Wolfe would have called it vulgar. I called it busy. Papers stacked like ambitions, cigars half-smoked and stubbed with precision, books on Italian law, art catalogues, and a few ledgers that were either accounting records or coded, prayers. The chair was pushed back slightly, not dramatically, but enough to suggest he'd risen fast. "Any signs of struggle?" "None." "Anything missing?" She hesitated. "Just one thing. A crystal decanter of Chianti, the Don's favorite. He'd opened it last night. It's gone." I wrote that down, slowly, because Wolfe would chew on it like a riddle wrapped in grapes. "And the phone?" She handed me a log. "Calls to 3 numbers last night. 2 to business associates, 1 to a private cell. The last call at 10:47 p.m. went unanswered. No name, just a number." "Mind if I copy this?" I asked. She nodded. "Mr. Wolfe will know what it means, I hope." I don't. Neither did I, but that was fine. I wasn't paid to know before Wolfe. I was paid to find things worth knowing. On my way out, I ran into Lucia Montelupo again, standing in the hallway beneath a portrait of her father that had the charisma of a warning label. "Anything?" she asked, searching my face. "Nothing solid yet," I said. "But your father didn't walk out without purpose. He planned something." Her eyes darkened. "Planned? Or was forced to?" "Maybe both." "Did he drink from that decanter last night?" "Yes," she said. "A single glass, before locking himself in the study." "Why?" I shook my head. "Just a thought. If Wolfe were here, he'd probably say wine and deceit have a similar bouquet." She smiled faintly, which told me she still had hope. Hope's a nice thing to have when logic's on vacation. I left her there and made a few more stops. One to the garage, where the driver confirmed the Don's car hadn't moved since yesterday, and another to the gatehouse, where the night guard swore on his pension that no one entered or left after midnight. The Don had vanished like a cork from a bottle, without noise, but with consequence. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was 5:45. Fritz let me in, and the scent of dinner, veal, thyme, and the arrogance of good cooking hit me like a friendly ambush. Wolfe was, of course, at his desk, eyes half closed in a posture that meant the gears were grinding at a high speed behind that immovable face. "Well," he said without looking up. "He's gone all right," I told him. "No car, no struggle, no ransom note. Just a missing decanter and a secretary who looks like she alphabetizes her conscience. He made 3 calls last night, one to a business partner, one to some banker, and one mystery number that didn't answer." He extended a hand. I gave him the note with the numbers. He barely glanced before saying, "Phooey. The 3rd number is familiar. Saul Panzer once traced it in connection with a smuggling case 3 years ago. A man named Victor Sarno." "Name rings a bell," I said. "Sarno used to move contraband liquor during the embargo years, didn't he?" "Used to," Wolfe said. "He now deals in information, a more profitable. Poison. Friend or foe?" "Neither. A parasite." "Call him." I did. Sarno answered on the 3rd ring, his voice slick as melted butter. When I mentioned Nero Wolfe, there was a pause long enough to count. "Well," he said finally, "if Wolfe's involved, then someone's in trouble." "What's the question?" "Don Montelupo. Heard from him lately." "Not since last night." That set my pulse ticking. "You spoke to him?" "We were supposed to meet. He cancelled last minute. Said he was entertaining. A guest. Didn't say who." "When was this?" 10:45. I met Wolfe's eyes across the room. He nodded slightly. "The call that went unanswered," he murmured. "Sarno was the guest, not the caller. Someone else was on that line." Sarno kept talking, his tone shading toward caution. "If Montelupo's gone missing, tell Wolfe to look at who profits by silence. The Don was closing a deal last night. Something about distribution rights overseas. He was nervous. Said he'd been double-crossed once before. He didn't plan to be again. By who? Didn't say." He hung up before I could press. Wolfe exhaled, a long, controlled breath that could have been mistaken for fatigue if you didn't know him. "Archie," he said, "the bottle he sent me. Where is it?" "In the kitchen, unopened." "Good. Bring it." When I returned, he examined it with a jeweler's focus. He didn't touch the cork, just stared, sniffed, and finally nodded. "The label is counterfeit." "Counterfeit?" "Yes. The wine is genuine, but the branding is false. Someone wanted me to believe it came from Montelupo's private stock. It did not." I sat down, feeling the weight of that settle in. "So someone used his name to bait you?" "Precisely. Which means they anticipated his disappearance, and mine, perhaps, as his confederate or witness." "That's cheerful." Wolfe ignored me. He rang for Fritz. "Take this bottle. Do not open it. Store it in the cold room." As Fritz left, Wolfe's eyes were distant, reflective. We are not pursuing a kidnapping, Archie. We are pursuing an arrangement, one interrupted before it could conclude. An arrangement involving wine, money, and at least one fake label. And deceit, he added softly. Always deceit. He leaned back, his fingers steepled. You will go again tomorrow. To Sarno, to the banker, to anyone who dined with Montelupo in the past week. Someone substituted that bottle for another. Find who? Any idea what I'll be walking into? Yes, Wolfe said. A tangle of ambition and treachery, both vintage and well-aged, and I suspect a murder that hasn't yet been committed. He reached for his beer. See that it isn't yours. I didn't argue. I'd been in this dance before, the kind where the music starts slow, but someone always ends up bleeding by the third verse. Morning sunlight doesn't do much to improve Manhattan's character, but it's the best time for legwork, especially when the trail involves people who prefer doing business in shadows. I left the brownstone at 9 with a list Wolfe had scrawled in that precise, slanted handwriting of his. Sarno, first, Keller, banker, Montelupo office, revisit afternoon. Observe, not interfere. That last part was underlined twice, which told me interference was inevitable. Sarno's office sat above a cigar shop on Madison Avenue, the kind of place that hadn't paid taxes since the Roosevelt administration. When I pushed open the frosted glass door, the smell of stale smoke and caution drifted out to meet me. Sarno himself was at a desk the size of a coffin lid, his thin hair combed back to suggest dignity and his smile suggesting it hadn't worked. Goodwin, he said, leaning back. Wolfe's errand boy. I didn't expect you this early. That's because I like to visit while people are still deciding whether to lie. He chuckled, lighting a cigar that smelled like betrayal wrapped in leaves. You'll have to be more specific. What lie do you want first? Start with Montelupo. You were supposed to meet him last night. He canceled. Who else knew about that meeting? Sarno's eyes shifted. Not much, but enough. Just me, him and the man financing the deal. Anton Keller. The banker? The same. He arranged the funds. Montelupo was buying into a European export chain. Something about cutting out middlemen. It was risky, even for him. And you? I was brokering introductions, he said, spreading his hands. You know how it is. Grease the wheels, take a fee, stay invisible. I didn't comment. And when the meeting was cancelled, you didn't ask why. Of course I asked. He said something came up that we'd reschedule. His tone... Sarno hesitated. It wasn't fear. It was finality, like he'd made a decision and didn't need us anymore. Maybe he didn't, I said. Or maybe someone made it for him. He didn't laugh at that. Tell Wolfe to tread carefully. There's money here, but also politics. If Montelupo's missing, someone powerful wanted him silent. He wouldn't say more, and pressing him would have been like squeezing a stone for water. I thanked him and left, stopping only long enough to note the way his eyes followed me. Calculating, nervous, the look of a man who knows more than he'll ever admit until he's sure where the chips fall. My next stop was Keller & Sons Financial on East 52nd. Anton Keller was a banker in the old-fashioned sense. Gray hair, gray suit, gray morality. His office smelled of paper and control. He greeted me with a politeness that carried the subtle warning of a loan agreement. Mr. Goodwin, he said, shaking my hand without warmth. Nero Wolfe's assistant, yes? To what do I owe the pleasure? I'm looking into the disappearance of Don Montelupo. Disappearance? He raised his brows. I was under the impression he was traveling. Where to? He smiled thinly. That I cannot say. Client confidentiality. I leaned against the edge of his desk. Mr. Keller, let's not turn this into a sermon. The Don hasn't been seen since last night. His car's in the garage, his phone's dead, and his daughter's worried enough to hire Wolfe. You financed his last venture. That makes you relevant." The pause stretched long enough to count interest on it. Then Keller sighed, removed his glasses, and began polishing them with a monogrammed handkerchief. Montelupo was in negotiations to acquire a European distributor, Venezia Holdings, a lucrative but precarious arrangement. There were discrepancies. He feared being deceived. By who? I assumed he meant his Italian partners, but yesterday he asked for a transfer to a private account in the Caymans. His own name, no intermediaries. He said it was precautionary. When I requested verification this morning, the funds had already moved. How much? Nearly $2 million. I let out a low whistle. A lot of precaution. He nodded, the faintest glimmer of unease flickering across his features. If he's missing, that money is now motive. But I assure you, Mr. Goodwin, I had nothing to do with it. I follow the numbers, not the people. That's a good motto, I said, right up until the numbers lead to a corpse. That got me a hard look, but no answer. I left him to his ledgers and headed back toward the street, where the city noise felt almost honest in comparison. By mid-afternoon, I was at Montelupo Imports, an office building overlooking the East River. The receptionist recognized the name Wolfe instantly. I guess reputation travels faster than elevators. Lucia was there again, in a gray suit this time, seated at her father's desk, the picture of control trying not to crack. "Any progress?" she asked. "Some. Your father moved $2 million offshore yesterday. Did you know about that?" Her eyes widened. "No. He never told me anything about his accounts." "Then I'd say he either planned to run or expected someone else to." She looked down, silent. On the desk, I noticed a small object half hidden beneath a stack of papers. A cork. Not any cork, either. This one had a crimson seal, identical to the label on the counterfeit bottle Wolfe had examined. "Mind if I keep this?" I asked. She blinked. "Of course." I slipped it into my pocket. "One more thing. Your father ever mention a man named Sarno?" Her jaw tightened. "Yes. I told him to stop dealing with him. Sarno's dangerous. He uses people. My father thought he could outsmart him. And Keller, he's worse," she said softly. "Respectable on the outside, but every time father worked with him, someone got hurt. That was plenty to chew on." I left her to her worries and headed back to the brownstone, arriving just before 6. Fritz met me at the door, handing me a glass of beer from Wolfe's tray before I even sat down. Wolfe was in his chair, a faint line between his brows, which meant progress but not satisfaction. "Well," he said. I handed over the cork. "Found this at Montelupo's office. Same seal as the fake bottle." He examined it closely, nostrils flaring slightly. "Yes, the same forgery. Consistent materials, identical wax. Whoever planted this bottle operates within Montelupo's circle, not outside it. That narrows the field." "Also," I said, "Montelupo moved $2 million offshore yesterday. Keller confirmed it." Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "Ah, anticipation indeed. The man expected betrayal. Perhaps he arranged his own disappearance as insurance. Or someone arranged it for him. Both possibilities remain," Wolfe said. "But I dislike coincidences. The wine, the counterfeit label, the vanished man, all threads of one weave." He closed his eyes for a long moment, then opened them again, sharper than before. "Archie, call Saul Panza. I want him to trace that Cayman account and the phone number of Montelupo's last call. And inform Miss Montelupo she will join us here tomorrow evening at 8, along with Mr. Keller and Mr. Sarno. If they demur, insist. That's a lot of guests for one dinner." "Not dinner," Wolfe said, the faintest smile touching his mouth. "Revelation." He leaned back, folding his hands over his stomach. "The truth, Mr. Goodwin, is fermenting. We must be patient until it matures." I knew that tone. It meant the game had entered the slow boil phase. Somewhere between a bottle of fake wine, a vanished Don, and two men who lied with professional grace, Wolfe had found his scent. And once he had that, the only thing left was for someone, usually me, to go wading into danger until the cork finally popped. As I headed upstairs to call Saul, I couldn't help thinking of Wolfe's last words before dinner. He'd said them quietly, almost to himself. "Wine and deceit, Archie. They share a virtue. Both reveal their true nature only when uncorked." Saul Panzer doesn't waste words. When he called back the next morning, the entire report fit between 2 sips of coffee. "The Cayman account's active," he said. "Opened 3 days ago under Montelupo's name, but accessed last night by proxy. Digital signature mismatch. Whoever withdrew the funds knew his passcodes, but not his sequence timing." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning it wasn't the Don." "And the phone number?" "Disposable, but tied to a burner purchased by an assistant at Keller & Sons 2 weeks ago. Name, Brian Metz. Keller's errand boy." That was enough to wake Wolfe from his morning torpor. He'd been sitting in his chair in the office, glowering at the orchids like they'd failed an exam. When I relayed Saul's report, his expression tightened, then relaxed, a small sign, but if you knew Wolfe, you recognized it as progress. "Metz," he said, rolling the name slowly. "An underling acting beyond his pay grade. Such behavior seldom originates independently." I took my seat, notebook open. "So Keller's pulling the strings?" "Perhaps. But I find subordinates often make the first foolish move. Ambition breeds mischief. Mr. Metz may have done something precipitous, like steal from his boss's client, or assist in his removal," Wolfe said calmly. "We shall determine which." Fritz entered then with a breakfast tray, soft-boiled eggs, toasted brioche, and coffee so rich it could buy a senator. Wolfe took a bite, chewed with deliberation, and said, "You will visit Keller's office. Find this Mr. Metz. Be observant, not accusatory. We must confirm whether the man knows his peril." It was barely 10 by the time I reached the bank again. Keller wasn't in. "Unavailable," his secretary said with the practiced neutrality of someone who has lied for years without guilt. But Metz was there, a wiry kid with nervous energy and a tie that had seen better knots. When I introduced myself, he tried to smile. "Mr. Wolfe's man, right? I've heard of you." "That's mutual," I said. "You handle correspondence for Keller?" "Yes, sir. Transfers? Client scheduling? Small accounts." "Does that include Don Montelupo?" That made his Adam's apple jump. I just processed the paperwork. Mr. Keller handles clients personally." I let silence do its work, watching him fidget. Then I said softly, "You bought a phone 2 weeks ago. Prepaid, unregistered. You used it to contact Montelupo last night." He froze. I could almost hear his brain tearing pages trying to find a story that fit. How could you? Listen, I didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Keller asked me to relay a message, that's all." "What message?" "That the meeting was off, that something changed." "And Montelupo's reaction?" "He didn't say much, just I see." Then he hung up. "Who told you to make that call?" He swallowed hard. "I can't." "You can," I said. "Because if you don't, you'll be explaining this to the police instead of me, and I'm friendlier than they are, believe it or not." He hesitated another second before breaking. "It was Keller. He said the deal was compromised, that Montelupo shouldn't meet Sarno or anyone until further notice. He looked worried, like someone had found out about the money transfer. After I made the call, he told me to forget it ever happened." "And you did?" "Yes. Until I saw the papers this morning. They said Montelupo was missing." His hands trembled slightly. "You think he's dead?" "I think Keller knows more than he's saying," I replied. "And if I were you, I'd take the day off." Back at the brown stone, Wolfe listened without interruption. When I finished, He reached for the small globe on his desk and spun it slowly, a habit of his when thinking through geography and deceit simultaneously. "Keller," he said, "is not a fool. To remove a man like Montelupo, he requires justification and distance. The phone, the forged bottle, the vanished funds, all serve both purposes. He wanted to ruin him. Worse, replace him." Wolfe's voice was soft, deliberate. The European venture would yield immense influence in import channels. If Keller could control that partnership, he'd become indispensable, but he needed Montelupo's cooperation or his absence. I poured myself a cup of coffee. So, Keller fakes a meeting, intercepts the Don, and makes him disappear. Possibly. Or perhaps Montelupo confronted him, and one of them overplayed his hand. Either way, the counterfeit wine was planted to implicate Montelupo in fraud if the matter surfaced. "That still doesn't explain why the wine was sent to you?" "It does," Wolfe said. "It was insurance. Keller feared Montelupo might expose the forgery, so he arranged to divert attention to me. If the counterfeit were discovered, it would appear as a business courtesy gone wrong rather than a deliberate scheme." "Meaning Keller wanted to use you as cover?" "Precisely. A gesture to an eminent detective, harmless in appearance, devastating in implication. Were it not for Miss Montelupo's arrival, I might have ignored it. Lucky break for us." Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "There is no luck, Archie. Only timing." The phone rang then, slicing the air like a verdict. I picked up. It was Saul again. "Got something new?" he said. "Montelupo's car just turned up." "Where?" "Warehouse district, Pier 19, abandoned, doors unlocked. No sign of forced entry." "Body?" "No, but the trunk had wine residue, Chianti to be exact. A broken bottle, same label as the one you mentioned." When I relayed this, Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened slightly around the armrest. "So," he murmured, "the counterfeit traveled, and somewhere between the brownstone and that warehouse, it shattered." "You think Montelupo was there?" "Undoubtedly. Whether alive or dead, he was transported in that car. Someone tried to dispose of evidence but lacked time or nerve. That, Archie, is our advantage." He stood, or rather, he levered himself upright with effort, which meant the matter had escalated from interesting to intolerable. "Call Inspector Kramer," he said. "Tell him I require access to that warehouse immediately. He will sputter, but he will agree." "Because you'll threaten to make him look slow?" "Because," Wolfe said, settling his yellow silk handkerchief into his pocket, "I shall offer him results before supper." It took less than an hour to arrange. By early evening, I was at Pier 19 with Kramer, who looked like he'd bitten into a lemon labeled Wolfe. The car was there, black sedan, keys still in the ignition. The trunk smelled faintly of wine and something metallic underneath. Blood's quiet cousin. "No body," Kramer grumbled. "Just a mess. Maybe a fat friend's losing his touch." "Or maybe you're early," I said. We scoured the area. The warehouse itself was empty, but for crates, dust, and a scattering of paper scraps near the loading dock. I pocketed one that caught my eye. A torn corner of an invoice stamped with Keller & Sons insignia. That would give Wolfe heartburn in all the right ways. Back home, I handed him the scrap. He studied it under the lamp, lips thinning. "So Keller's handprint reaches even here." He looked up at me. "Archie, tomorrow evening's gathering is no longer preliminary. It is decisive. Ensure all three attend. Miss Montelupo, Keller, Sarno, and prepare for resistance. The guilty seldom enjoy conversation." "Got it," I said. "And what's your angle?" Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. "Observation, interrogation, revelation." His tone was final, the cadence of strategy, not speculation. I started to rise, but his voice stopped me. "Archie." "Yeah?" Do not underestimate the daughter. She brought this case, but she also withheld something. What makes you say that? She said her father drank 1 glass of wine, yet the decanter was half empty. That landed like a slow-burning fuse. Wolfe closed his eyes again, murmuring to himself, the missing half, the false label, the vanished man, trifecta of deceit, and 1 glass short of confession. He didn't need to say more. The stage was set, the players summoned, and whatever secret Lucia Montelupo was holding back was about to uncork itself, with Wolfe waiting, patient as a spider, in his chair. By the time the next evening rolled around, the brownstone had the uneasy quiet of a stage before curtain. Fritz moved through the kitchen like a ghost of efficiency, setting out crystal glasses and preparing a light dinner that nobody but Wolfe would enjoy. I'd done my part. 3 invitations delivered, 3 reluctant acceptances obtained through a combination of persuasion, implication, and the kind of tone that makes people realize saying no isn't an option. Wolfe, as usual, hadn't budged from his chair all day, though the way he sat, still centered, eyes half closed, told me he was thinking hard enough to scorch the wallpaper. At precisely 8, the bell rang. Fritz opened the door to Lucia Montelupo first. She was dressed in black again, simple but precise, the kind of elegance that makes mourning look like strategy. Her face had lost some of the panic from before. In its place was determination, the kind that comes from knowing you're about to be judged and choosing not to flinch. "Miss Montelupo," Wolfe greeted her, gesturing to the red leather chair. "Please, sit." She did, hands folded tightly in her lap. A few minutes later, Anton Keller arrived, his politeness wound tight around a coil of irritation. He gave the room a quick glance, assessing its order and probably its value. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "I must say, it's unusual to be summoned like this. I came as a courtesy." Wolfe's reply was mild enough to make Granite seem temperamental. "Courtesy is an uncommon currency. I'm glad you trade in it." Then came Sarno, swagger in a threadbare suit, his grin an apology for his existence. "Evening, Wolfe. You planning a sermon or an execution?" "That," Wolfe said, "depends on your cooperation." When they were seated, Wolfe closed his eyes for a long moment, breathing as though arranging his words into architecture. Then he spoke. "3 days ago, Don Cesare Montelupo sent me a gift, a crate of Chianti accompanied by a note expressing gratitude and anticipation. Within 24 hours, he vanished. The wine, as I later determined, bore counterfeit labels, an attempt to obscure its true source. That single fact has led us to this room." Keller shifted. "Mr. Wolfe, with respect, I fail to see—" "You will," Wolfe interrupted. "The counterfeit was not an isolated curiosity. It was a cipher, one linking Montelupo's disappearance, a financial transfer to the Caymans, and an arrangement involving each of you." Sarno's grin wavered. Lucia looked at the floor. Keller's eyes stayed fixed on Wolfe, trying to anticipate where the trap lay. "I will summarize," Wolfe continued, "and you may correct me if I misrepresent any point. Mr. Keller, you arranged the financial logistics of a partnership between Montelupo and European distributors. Mr. Sarno, you facilitated introductions through channels less visible to law. Miss Montelupo, your father relied upon you to temper both men's ambitions." "Ambitions?" Keller asked coldly. "This was a business transaction." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Yet every business transaction has appetites beneath it. Yours, Mr. Keller, was control. Mr. Sarno's was survival. And Don Montelupo's, pride. He wished to prove he could master the game without playing by its rules." Lucia's lips parted, a protest forming, but Wolfe lifted a finger. "He failed." The silence in the room thickened. "Yesterday," Wolfe went on, "Archie visited your offices, Mr. Keller. He found your assistant, Mr. Metz, nervous and talkative. He admitted making a call to Montelupo, one you ordered, to cancel his meeting with Mr. Sarno. You claimed the deal was compromised. In truth, it was already complete. Montelupo had transferred $2 million to an account you established, not for his protection, but his removal. Keller's face reddened, but he stayed still. That's absurd. Feuille, Wolfe said softly. The records are clear. Saul Panzer traced the digital mismatch in authorization. Your assistant lacked the encryption key sequence. He used a secondary code, one you supplied. Conveniently, the funds then disappeared into a holding firm in Zurich you control indirectly through a subsidiary. That's circumstantial. Hardly, Wolfe interrupted again. The car discovered at Pier 19 contained fragments of the same counterfeit label used on the wine you commissioned. You engaged a forger to produce a set of identical Chianti bottles. One you sent to me, one remained at Montelupo's residence, and one, broken in the car, was used to transport him, dead or alive. Lucia gasped softly. Transport him? You mean he's dead? Wolfe said. No, not yet. His disappearance serves purpose only while he remains unseen. If he were dead, Mr. Keller would have arranged a discovery, preferably scandalous, to disguise theft as tragedy. But Keller miscalculated. Keller's calm cracked. This is outrageous. I won't sit here. You will, Wolfe said, voice flat, immovable. You're already seated. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the ticking clock seemed cautious. Wolfe's eyes opened now, sharp and alive. You see, Mr. Keller, the counterfeit wine was meant as camouflage. But deceit, like poor fermentation, produces an aroma impossible to conceal. Montelupo knew of your forgery. He sent the crate to me not as tribute, but as warning, a message encoded in habit. He anticipated betrayal, and by invoking my name, he ensured someone would unravel it. Lucia rose half from her seat. Then he knew Keller would try to... Yes, Wolfe said, and he prepared for it. The $2 million were never truly moved. The account in the Caymans is decoy. The real transfer went elsewhere, to a private fund accessible only through biometric confirmation. Montelupo set a failsafe. If he does not return within 72 hours, those funds will be donated to the government agency investigating Keller's prior transactions. The words hit Keller like a physical blow. His color drained. You're bluffing. I detest bluffing, Wolfe said. It wastes breath. The clock began ticking yesterday morning. Keller's composure collapsed in fragments. You can't know that. I do, Wolfe said, because your assistant, in his panic, forwarded the account routing details to one of my associates this morning, attempting to sell information for protection. Sarno laughed, low and bitter. Well, Keller, looks like you finally diversified. In incompetence. Wolfe turned his gaze on him. As for you, Mr. Sarno, you acted as liaison in this scheme, delivering counterfeit goods for a price. You knew Keller's intentions, but chose silence, expecting to profit later by manipulating whichever man survived. You are therefore complicit, though not principal. Sarno lifted his hands. Hey, I just introduced people. You can't pin a disappearance on me. I need not, Wolfe said. Inspector Kramer will handle that. I merely require your presence to complete the geometry of deceit. Then his voice shifted, quieter, deeper. And now, Miss Montelupo, you will tell us what you omitted. Lucia stiffened. I've told you everything. No, Wolfe said. You told us your father drank 1 glass of wine that night, but the decanter was half empty. Who drank the rest? Her eyes widened, the first flicker of real fear I'd seen in her. I think, Wolfe said, that you shared it with him. You admitted earlier you visited him before he locked himself in the study. You argued, perhaps. You feared his dealings, his company. He poured you a glass to prove his trust, or to test it. Her voice broke. I didn't mean to. He said it was poisoned. The room went still. Keller stared at her, open-mouthed. Sarno stopped breathing altogether. "Poisoned?" Wolfe asked. "He told me someone had tampered with his stock," Lucia said, trembling. "He made me drink first, to prove I hadn't betrayed him. I did. Then he drank. Nothing happened. He laughed, said it was all theater, a test of loyalty. He sent the rest of the wine away, to you, as proof of the deceit. He said if anyone could see through it, it would be you." Wolfe nodded once, solemnly. He was correct. Then he turned his gaze on Keller. "You see now, Mr. Keller, how delicate deceit can be. One lie too many, one forgery too precise, and your design unravels. Kramer will arrive momentarily to collect you both. Mr. Sarno will remain as witness. Miss Montelupo, you are free of guilt, though not of burden." Keller surged to his feet, but before he could speak, the front door opened. Kramer's heavy voice filled the hall. "Evening, Wolfe. You said to come ready for company." "Indeed," Wolfe said, closing his eyes again. "You will find Mr. Keller eager to make a statement." Lucia sank back into her chair, silent tears streaking her face. Wolfe, unmoved, took a slow sip of beer as the room filled with the dull rhythm of footsteps and handcuffs. When the noise faded, I looked at him. "You sure about Montelupo?" "He lives," Wolfe said. "Men who plan this carefully seldom die accidentally. He will resurface when it profits him." "And the wine?" He lifted the last untouched bottle from his desk, turning it in the light. "We shall return it to him," he said, "unopened. I prefer not to drink reminders of human folly." He paused, then added quietly, "Though occasionally, Archie, deceit ages almost as well as wine. It merely leaves a bitterer finish." That was Wolfe's idea of a benediction. He signaled for Fritz to serve dinner, and as the smell of truffles filled the air, the brownstone settled back into its rhythm. Silence, order, and the faint echo of a case that had ended exactly as Wolfe preferred. Without movement, without mercy, and with the truth finally uncorked. Kramer stayed longer than usual that night, which meant Wolfe had to endure 3 separate bursts of indignation and 2 cigars' worth of smoke thick enough to fumigate the orchids. I sat through it, taking notes as the inspector grumbled about theatrical setups and unprovable motives, while Wolfe answered each protest with the patience of a man explaining arithmetic to a child. By the time Kramer finally stomped out, taking Keller, Sarno, and a half-dozen detectives with him, the air in the office felt like it needed to be strained through a colander. Fritz opened the windows despite Wolfe's glare, and I followed him with the ashtray before it melted. Wolfe remained motionless in his chair, fingers interlaced, eyes closed, the look of a man dissecting silence. I knew better than to interrupt. When he's thinking, you could fire a cannon through the room and he'd complain about the draft, but not the noise. After 10 minutes, he spoke. "Archie, the matter is unfinished." I was halfway to the door. "Unfinished?" Keller's in handcuffs, Sarno's babbling for leniency, and the girl's cleared. "What's left?" "Montelupo," he said simply. "Sure, but you told Kramer he's alive." "I did. And he is." Wolfe opened his eyes, fixing me with that unblinking stare that could pry open a tomb. But his whereabouts are not a matter of conjecture. They are deliberate. He has staged his absence, and his next appearance will determine whether justice concludes or begins again. I frowned. "You think he's watching all this play out?" "I am certain of it." Wolfe leaned forward slightly, his voice a slow, deliberate current. "He used me as both witness and weapon. By sending that wine, he ensured Keller's exposure without implicating himself. But men who orchestrate chaos seldom stop when their goal is met. They refine it. He will contact us." "Or maybe he's just enjoying early retirement," I said. That earned me a look of faint disgust. "Archie, please. A man like Don Montelupo does not retire. He regroups." The phone rang just then, as if the city had been waiting for a Wolfe's cue. Fritz answered, spoke quietly, and handed it over. "It's for you, Mr. Wolfe, a man who refuses to give his name." Wolfe nodded to me. I took the receiver. "Goodwin speaking." The voice on the other end was low, steady, and unmistakably confident. "Tell Mr. Wolfe that gratitude and anticipation are fulfilled." I stiffened. "Don Montelupo." A pause, then a faint laugh. "He already knows. Tell him the wine served its purpose, and tell him the next crate will not be counterfeit." The line went dead. Wolfe's brows arched when I relayed it. "So," he murmured, "he declares victory." "Sounds more like a warning," I said. "What does he mean? The next crate?" "Precisely what it implies. Another message, another gesture." Wolfe exhaled slowly. "The man is weaving a tapestry of symbols, Archie. He speaks in acts, not words. The counterfeit was deceit. The genuine will be truth, and I suspect he means to deliver it in person. Then what's he waiting for?" "For Keller's confession to circulate," Wolfe said. "For Sarno to name his associates. For the dust to settle so that his return looks like vindication, not retribution. He intends to re-emerge cleansed by the scandal he engineered." I sank into my chair. "You almost have to admire it." "Admire?" Wolfe's tone sharpened. "Archie, do not confuse cunning with virtue. Montelupo's scheme eliminated competitors, but left corpses of reputation and conscience. That is not intellect, it is indulgence." I didn't argue, mostly because Fritz entered then with beer for Wolfe and coffee for me. As he set the tray down, he glanced toward the window. "There is a man across the street," he said quietly. "He's been standing there for some time." I went to look. Sure enough, under the glow of the street lamp, a dark figure leaned casually against a lamp post, cigarette tip flaring red every few seconds. Too far to see his face, but something in the posture, too still, too deliberate, made my neck prickle. Wolfe didn't bother to rise. "Describe him." "Tall, dark coat, watching the house but not pretending otherwise." "Then he is not surveillance," Wolfe said. "He is signal." I turned. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Wolfe said, "that Montelupo wishes to remind us he exists. Do not confront him. He will leave when satisfied." He was right. 20 minutes later, the man disappeared into the night, swallowed by traffic and fog. When I returned, Wolfe was making notes on a sheet of yellow paper, his pen scratching with surgical precision. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will speak again with Miss Montelupo. She must know her father's next move." "She's been through the ringer, boss." "All the more reason," Wolfe replied, "to clarify what she is defending. Her loyalty is formidable but misplaced. If she continues to shield him, she becomes accessory to deception." The next morning, Lucia came promptly at 10. Her composure had hardened overnight, like porcelain left to cool. She greeted Fritz politely and stepped into the office without hesitation. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I wanted to thank you. Inspector Kramer told me everything you uncovered. I can't imagine how you—" "Sit down, Miss Montelupo," Wolfe said, not unkindly. "Gratitude is premature. Your father has contacted us." Her eyes widened. "He's alive?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and clever. He has staged his survival as spectacle. He intends to reappear, perhaps to reclaim his empire or rewrite the story to his liking. You, Miss Montelupo, are pivotal to that design." She looked shaken. "I don't understand." "You will," Wolfe said. "You are his witness, his alibi. When he reemerges, he will do so. Through you, he will claim persecution, manipulation, perhaps even frame Keller as architect of all deceit. To succeed, he needs your public support." Lucia pressed her hands together. "He said once that the world believes what it's shown, not what it's told." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "He is correct, and he intends to show them a reformed man." That is why you must not participate." Her chin lifted slightly. "He's still my father." "And that," Wolfe replied, "is his greatest weapon." The conversation stretched taut as wire. She struggled, visibly torn between duty and dread. Finally, she whispered, "If I refuse him, he'll hate me." Wolfe leaned back, his tone almost gentle. "Then you will have accomplished something few ever do. You will have taught him consequence." Tears welled but didn't fall. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then rose. "If he contacts me again, I'll tell you." "Do so immediately," Wolfe said. "And Miss Montelupo, be cautious of gifts. He favors them as instruments of control." After she left, the office seemed quieter, though not calmer. I looked at Wolfe. "You think she'll hold out?" "She will try. Whether she succeeds depends on the strength of her will and his weakness for drama." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling fan. "So what now? Wait for the next bottle?" Wolfe's mouth curved faintly. "Precisely. And when it arrives, we shall uncork not merely wine, but confession." 2 days passed before the package came. Fritz brought it in at noon, his expression grim. A single wooden crate, smaller than the last, with no sender's mark, only a wax seal embossed with the same lion emblem. Wolfe inspected it without touching. "Do not open it," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "You think it's dangerous?" "No," he said. "Predictable." Still, I pried the lid loose under his watchful gaze. Inside was 1 bottle of Chianti, no forgery this time, and a folded note tucked under the straw padding. I handed it to him. Wolfe read silently, then passed it to me, to the only man who understood the game before it ended. "The pawn is removed, the board reset. Should you wish to know the final move, dine with me tomorrow night at my villa. Bring no one. Cesare M." "Well," I said, "that's subtle." Wolfe's mouth compressed into a thin line. "He seeks validation, not conversation, a demonstration of dominance. I shall oblige, but on my terms." "You're actually going?" "I never leave this house," Wolfe said, "but he does not yet understand that presence is not required for power." He dictated a reply, brief and exact. "To Don Cesare Montelupo. The game ends when the rules are no longer yours to set. My regards, Nero Wolfe." I delivered it myself, via a courier who didn't know what he was carrying. And as I dropped it off, I couldn't help but feel that the game, as Wolfe called it, was still moving, piece by deliberate piece. That night over dinner, Wolfe said quietly, "He will answer by sunrise." I didn't doubt him. Montelupo's kind never could resist proving they were the last to play the move. And when morning came, the phone rang again. 3 times. Sharp, deliberate. Fritz answered, hesitated, then turned to us. "Mr. Wolfe," he said softly, "the police have found a body. In a villa on Long Island. It's Don Montelupo." Wolfe didn't flinch. He only closed his eyes and said, "At last, the wine has finished breathing." The words hung in the air like the echo of a closing vault. Fritz's voice trailed off, and the silence that followed felt like the brownstone itself had stopped breathing. Wolfe didn't move for several seconds. Then, slowly, he reached for his beer, lifted it halfway and set it down untouched. "Details," he said quietly. Fritz cleared his throat. Inspector Kramer telephoned. "The body was discovered this morning by the caretaker. The property belongs to Don Montelupo. The police have confirmed his identity. They wish to speak with you." Wolfe nodded once. Naturally. He didn't say another word. He simply sat, eyes half closed, while the weight of inevitability filled the room. I'd seen him like that before, when the facts had come full circle and logic met something it couldn't outthink. Mortality. I went to the phone, called Kramer, and got his gravel pit voice on the line. "Goodwin," he said, already irritated. Tell your boss to quit pretending he doesn't work for us. We need him down at the scene. You know better, Inspector. He doesn't do field trips. What have you got? Dead man. Shot once in the chest. No struggle, no forced entry, no sign of robbery. The house is clean, too clean. We found one glass of wine on the table, half full, untouched. Bottles empty. No fingerprints except his own. Suicide? I asked. Maybe. But Wolfe told me last week this guy was alive and hiding. Now he's not. I'd like to know how your fat friend knew that before it happened. That makes two of us, I said, and hung up before he could enjoy himself. When I turned, Wolfe's eyes were open. You heard, I said. I did. The half-full glass. Again. Yeah, what about it? He frowned slightly. Montelupo began with wine and ended with it. A symmetry that suggests deliberation, but the hand that fired the shot, whether his own or another's, is yet uncertain. I knew better than to argue when he was in that tone, the one halfway between philosophy and indictment. He leaned back, the lines around his eyes deepening. Archie, we will visit the villa. I almost dropped my pencil. We will? What? You mean you'll actually leave the brownstone? Do not be impertinent, he said. I will tolerate the intrusion. This matter demands direct examination. I didn't argue. You don't interrupt a lunar eclipse, and you don't question Wolfe when he decides to break his own rule. By noon, Fritz had packed what looked like enough provisions for a siege, and we were in the car heading for Long Island. Wolfe sat in the back, silent, wrapped in his overcoat like a reluctant monarch on the way to coronation. The villa stood on a bluff overlooking the Sound, a Mediterranean sprawl of white stone and arrogance. Police cars lined the drive, their lights dulled in the gray daylight. Kramer met us at the gate, chewing on an unlit cigar like it owed him money. Wolfe, he said flatly, you decided to grace us. Only because necessity outweighs distaste, Wolfe replied. Lead the way. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wine and gunpowder. The living room was immaculate, too immaculate, like a museum of false peace. On the table near the window sat the wine glass, exactly as Kramer had described, half full and gleaming dark red in the muted light. Wolfe didn't look at the body first. He looked at the table, the glass, the floor. Then, very slowly, he turned to the figure lying sprawled near the hearth. Cesare Montelupo. Even in death, the man looked composed. His suit was pressed, his tie straight, his face calm, as if he'd merely paused mid-thought. A single bullet hole marred the center of his chest, neat and deliberate. Wolfe studied him without moving closer. A fine irony, he murmured. The man who feigned death to manipulate life now achieves the inverse. Kramer gave a snort. You can save the poetry, Wolfe. Was it suicide or not? That depends, Wolfe said, on how one defines surrender. He motioned for me. Archie, the glass. I bent, careful not to touch the rim. The liquid shimmered faintly, darker than it should have been. Looks normal enough. Smell, Wolfe said. I did. The scent was rich, sweet and faintly bitter beneath. Almond, I said. Cyanide. Kramer's face darkened. Poison and a bullet? Overkill. Not overkill, Wolfe said. Overwriting. The poison was meant to ensure finality, the bullet to ensure narrative. Kramer scowled. Plain English, please. Montelupo intended the world to believe two things, Wolfe said. That he could not be silenced, and that he died by choice. The poison guarantees death. The gun dramatizes it. But he could not have fired the shot himself after ingestion. Cyanide acts swiftly. Therefore, he had assistance. You're saying someone helped him kill himself? I'm saying, Wolfe replied, that someone completed his design. Kramer muttered something about theatrical nonsense and went to bark orders at the officers. Wolfe, meanwhile, stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the empty bottle beside the glass. Archie, note the cork. It lay on the table, ordinary at first glance, except for the faint imprint of a lion's head. Same seal as before, I said. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. The genuine this time. The Don kept his promise. He gestured toward the decanter. There will be 2 glasses in this room, not one. Find the other. I searched, methodical as I could. It took 5 minutes, but I found it in the sink. A single stemmed glass, rinsed hastily but not dried. The faint trace of residue clung near the base, and a lipstick mark glinted on the rim. Lucia, I said quietly. Wolfe nodded. Of course. Kramer reappeared just then. We found a second set of footprints outside, smaller than his. Miss Montelupo's, Wolfe said. He summoned her, as I predicted. Kramer's tone grew sharp. You telling me his daughter shot him? No, Wolfe said, not quite. She fulfilled his final request. He prepared the poison himself, perhaps even drank it. But when death came slower than he expected, he instructed her to fire. For her, obedience was the final act of loyalty. For him, it was control, one last manipulation, sanctified by affection. That's insane, Kramer snapped. Of course, Wolfe said, but also true. He turned toward the body one last time. The man wished to die as architect, not victim. Even his demise is composition, a performance for posterity. Kramer sighed, rubbing his temples. So what do I write in my report? Assisted suicide by filial devotion. Write the truth, Wolfe said. He engineered his own end. She merely provided punctuation. Back in the car, Wolfe sat in silence all the way home. The afternoon sun slid behind clouds, and Manhattan reappeared like a familiar scowl. When we reached the brownstone, he went directly to the office, dropped into his chair, and stared at the ceiling for a long minute before speaking. Archie, he said finally, you will telephone Miss Montelupo. She must come tomorrow to give her statement to Kramer. Ensure she understands I will not shield her, but neither will I condemn. You think she'll come? She will, Wolfe said. She has inherited her father's pride. Though tempered by shame, she will want to explain. That night, the brownstone felt heavier than usual, the air thick with memory. I poured myself a drink and watched the city lights flicker beyond the window. Wolfe, in the next room, was dictating a brief letter to the district attorney. Concise, precise, irrefutable. When he finished, he sat for a while in silence, his massive hands folded, his eyes on the orchids. A pity, he murmured. He might have lived to savor his victory, had he understood restraint. I said nothing. There are times when even I know better than to fill silence with words. He turned to me at last. Archie, I believe I shall forego wine for a time. I raised my glass. Understandable. Poison's bad for the palate. That earned me a faint scowl. You are flippant. Occupational hazard, I said. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. Montelupo played God with men's loyalties. In the end, his own daughter became the instrument of his immortality. The irony is exquisite, but not appetizing. Fritz entered quietly with dinner, the clatter of silver against china slicing through the quiet. Wolfe didn't move. Finally, he spoke, almost to himself. Archie, do you know the true difference between deceit and tragedy? No, but I bet it's not funny. It isn't, he said softly. Deceit feeds on others. Tragedy feeds on itself. I didn't answer. Outside, the city hummed its indifferent tune, and inside the brownstone, order returned like an old habit. Me writing notes for the report, Wolfe staring into thoughts too large for comfort. The case of Don Montelupo had closed, but its aftertaste lingered, a vintage of intellect and ruin decanted in equal measure. And as the clock struck midnight, Wolfe finally spoke again, barely audible over the ticking. "The Don's final drink," he said, "was not the wine, Archie. It was power, and it poisoned him perfectly." Morning in the brownstone was a thing unto itself, quiet as a library and ordered as a ledger. But that morning the air carried something brittle. The Montelupo case was supposed to be closed, wrapped and catalogued in Wolfe's precise moral filing system, but even the orchids seemed uneasy. Fritz went about his duties more softly than usual, as if the house itself were listening for what Wolfe might say next. When I came into the office, Wolfe was already in his chair, the yellow drapes half drawn against the winter light. He hadn't touched breakfast, which told me his mind was chewing on something more indigestible. A stack of papers sat on the desk beside the typewriter. Kramer's official report, delivered an hour earlier. Wolfe had read it twice. "Anything missing?" I asked, lighting a cigarette. "Everything essential," he said dryly. I took that as my cue to sit down. Kramer's report says the case is concluded. Death by self-inflicted means, assisted by emotional duress. Lucia Montelupo's to testify, then released. Case closed. "Closed," Wolfe muttered, only in the bureaucratic sense. Inspector Kramer measures completion by paperwork, not understanding. "Then what's missing?" Wolfe's eyes lifted to me. "Understanding." He reached for the report, tapped a paragraph with his finger. "Kramer states the poison was found in the decanter residue, but the laboratory notes," he gestured to another sheet, "indicate a lower concentration than would induce death. Montelupo ingested only a trace amount. The cyanide present in his bloodstream far exceeded what that glass could contain." I frowned. "Meaning the wine wasn't the main dose?" "Precisely. It was misdirection. Again, theater." "Then where'd the real dose come from?" "That," he said, "is our unfinished business." He leaned back, his face clouded in thought. Montelupo anticipated scrutiny. He ensured that each act of deception pointed backward, to the forged bottle, the counterfeit label, the ritual of wine. But the true instrument of death lay elsewhere. Someone ensured his silence, not obedience, not affection. Elimination. "You mean Lucia didn't fire the gun?" "No," he said calmly. "She fired, but she did not poison." That one word hung between us like an unspoken challenge. I exhaled slowly. "So someone else was there, after she left?" "Before," Wolfe said, "and possibly unseen." He looked toward the orchids as if the thought itself offended him. "Archie, arrange for Miss Montelupo to visit this afternoon. She will not refuse. In the meantime, contact Saul. Tell him to trace the villa staff, groundskeepers, caretakers, temporary hires within the last month. One of them is the missing hand." I didn't waste time arguing. Saul was reachable at his usual haunt, a diner that looked like it had never served anything hot. When I filled him in, he didn't ask for details. "Give me 6 hours," he said, "and a pot of coffee." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe still hadn't moved. The clock ticked, the orchids breathed, and somewhere downstairs Fritz clattered faintly with silver. At 4, the bell rang. Lucia Montelupo entered without hesitation, her posture taut but her eyes steady. She looked older, as if grief had added years overnight. "Mr. Wolfe," she said quietly, "I came because you asked, not because I owe you answers." "That is wise," Wolfe said. "You owe me nothing. You owe yourself truth." She hesitated, then sat. "If this is about the police—" "It is not," Wolfe interrupted. "It is about poison." Her breath caught. "What about it?" "Your father's death was not solely of his design. The concentration of cyanide in his blood exceeds what he could have consumed from the glass you described. Someone supplemented it." Her face went pale. "That's impossible. He poured it himself." "I saw." "You saw what he wanted you to see," Wolfe said. He played the role to perfection, but there was another in the house. Someone with access to the cellar, to the decanter, to the ritual itself. A hand unseen. Lucia shook her head. There was no one. The caretaker, Pietro, wasn't even there that night. My father dismissed him early. Wolfe's brows lifted. Did he? Or was that what you were told? Before she could answer, the phone rang. I picked it up. It was Saul. Got your man, he said. Pietro De Luca. Worked at the villa for 3 months. Before that, he was employed by Montelupo Imports. But here's the kicker. He's not Italian, he's Austrian. Real name's Peter Lutz. Served as Keller's logistics clerk 5 years ago. I glanced at Wolfe. His eyes narrowed slightly. You're certain? Positive, Saul said. And one more thing. He left town last night. Bought a one-way ticket to Montreal. Thank you, Saul. Excellent. I hung up. Wolfe folded his hands. So, he said softly, the parasite leaves the host. Lucia looked bewildered. What are you saying? Mr. Keller employed this man years before your father's partnership. When Keller's enterprise collapsed under investigation, Lutz vanished. Your father later hired him, likely unaware of the connection, or perhaps aware, believing it to his advantage. In either case, Lutz remained loyal to Keller's ghost, not his employer. Her voice trembled. You mean he killed my father? Yes, Wolfe said, by subtle means. He dosed the wine earlier in the day. When your father drank, he consumed enough to weaken, not kill. Then, at your departure, Lutz returned. He administered the final dose, perhaps through his evening cigar, perhaps a laced handkerchief. He shot Montelupo afterward to preserve the illusion of control. She covered her mouth, eyes wide. Why? Keller was already dead to him. Revenge, Wolfe said. Loyalty is a peculiar contagion. Lutz likely blamed your father for Keller's ruin. Or perhaps he simply wished to profit from what remained. There's always money in martyrdom. I scribbled notes, already feeling the chill of the truth settling in. Kramer's gonna love this, I muttered. Wolfe ignored me. His gaze remained fixed on Lucia. Miss Montelupo, this revelation serves you as much as it condemns another. Your father was neither hero nor monster. He was strategist to the end, but even the most cunning forget that pawns sometimes play twice. Her shoulders sagged. So it wasn't his choice. In part, it was, Wolfe said gently. He invited death. Another merely ensured punctuality. She stood, uncertain. Will the police find him? The caretaker? They will, Wolfe said. Mr. Panzer will see to it. As she turned to leave, Wolfe added quietly, Miss Montelupo, grief is a poor companion for guilt. If you must remember your father, remember that he trusted you to finish what he began, not to carry its weight. She paused at the door. You mean to forgive him? I mean to understand him, Wolfe said. Forgiveness is for priests. After she left, the quiet returned, layered and dense. Wolfe exhaled slowly, the kind of sigh that sounded like both release and resignation. Archie, he said finally, prepare a statement for Kramer. Succinctly, include the name Peter Lutz and his departure. Mention the poisoning method as conjectural, not proven. You think Kramer'll accept it? He'll object, of course. Then he'll verify and take credit, as is his habit. I finished writing, and Fritz came in to clear the untouched food. Wolfe's gaze followed him absently, then drifted to the orchids again. Archie, he said after a while, it interests me how deception persists beyond the deceiver. Keller's scheme, Montelupo's performance, Lutz's devotion, each one nested within the other, like Russian dolls of treachery. Nice metaphor, I said. You should write a book. Perhaps, he said. But books require endings. Life provides only continuations. That was as close to melancholy as Wolfe ever got. He reached for his beer, studied it for a moment, then set it aside untouched once more. "I find I no longer have a taste for bitterness," he said. "Fritz may dispose of the remaining wine." I couldn't resist. "You sure? Some of it's genuine this time." He gave me a look that would have wilted a lesser man. "Archie, authenticity is overrated when the aftermath tastes of poison." And with that, he closed his eyes, leaning back as the room settled into its accustomed rhythm. Outside, New York murmured its restless hymn, indifferent as always, while inside, the last trace of Montelupo's shadow dissolved into stillness. The case was finished now, not with triumph, but with that peculiar brand of justice Wolfe favored. Quiet, inevitable, and profoundly unsatisfying. I poured myself a fresh drink, sat back, and let the silence take its rightful place. Wolfe would never admit it, but he'd been shaken. Not by the crime, but by the reflection it cast. Deceit, loyalty, and pride. He'd seen them all too clearly, and maybe, just maybe, he didn't like the resemblance. "Archie," he said suddenly, eyes still closed. "Yeah? If ever I send you wine unbidden, refuse it." I grinned. "That's easy. You'd never part with good liquor for free." A faint sound, half snort, half sigh, escaped him. "You may be right. Still, consider it instruction." And that, I knew, was Wolfe's way of closing the curtain. No flourish, no moral proclamation. Just the quiet weight of intellect restored. The brownstone exhaled around us. Steady, timeless, inviolate once more. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the city in a thin layer of forgiveness it hadn't earned. Inside, Nero Wolfe leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded, and murmured, "Not to me, not to anyone. Even truth, Archie, when aged too long, begins to taste like wine." By late afternoon the next day, the last threads of the case had knotted themselves into silence. The papers had already named it the Don's final drink, Kramer's phrasing naturally, with his own brand of triumph painted over the details. The city had moved on, it always did. But in the brownstone, the echo of that name lingered like the scent of old wine. Sweet, heavy, and too close to the truth for comfort. Fritz cleared the table after lunch, leaving Wolfe and me in the office. The orchids were in full bloom again, silent spectators to another finished tragedy. Wolfe had spent the morning dictating his statement for the district attorney, short and surgical. Names, actions, motives, no speculation, no sentiment. When he was done, he signed it with the kind of finality that belongs to a man who despises repetition. Now, as he leaned back in his chair, he seemed carved out of patience and thought. "The world," he said finally, "is addicted to narratives, Archie. It demands beginnings and ends. But men like Montelupo confuse both." "He confused a lot more than that," I said. "Poison, wine, bullets. Take your pick. The only thing missing was a confession in calligraphy." Wolfe gave a faint snort. He confessed in act, not word. That is the rarest honesty of all. I poured myself a cup of coffee and let him talk. He wasn't done yet. Not until the last moral stone had been turned over and polished. Montelupo was a man of control, Wolfe went on. Every gesture calculated, every alliance measured. But when he realized control had become illusion, he chose the one act still his to command, his exit. Even that he corrupted by deceit. "Lutz added the final touch," I said. "Seems fitting in a grim sort of way." "Yes," Wolfe said, "the apprentice of treachery perfecting his master's flaw. It is the symmetry of human folly." He closed his eyes a moment as if tasting the words. "Kramer will congratulate himself for resolution, but he will miss the essence. Montelupo did not die of poison or lead. He died of pride. The others were merely couriers." I let that one hang. It wasn't an opinion. It was a eulogy. "Lucia called this morning," I said after a while. She's leaving for Florence. Wants to start over. Good, Wolfe said. Distance will do what repentance cannot. She said she wanted to thank you. Unnecessary, Wolfe murmured. Her gratitude is misplaced. I exposed the truth. I did not heal it. There was quiet for a long stretch after that. Outside, a delivery truck rattled down 35th Street, and the world resumed its unbothered rhythm. I thought about Montelupo, the man who'd tried to turn deception into art, and about Lucia, carrying his shadow across the Atlantic. I also thought about Wolfe, who dismantled the whole affair without leaving his chair as usual. But there was something different in the air. Not victory, not even satisfaction, just understanding, stripped bare. Fritz returned with Wolfe's afternoon beer, setting it down beside him. Wolfe lifted it slowly, examined the amber color against the light, and then placed it back on the coaster untouched. "Archie," he said, "there is a lesson in this." "Which is?" "That deceit, like fermentation, consumes its maker before it matures." He reached for his book, Tacitus, naturally, and opened it as if the matter were concluded, which for him it was. I leaned back, watching him settle into his fortress of words and logic, and wondered if he ever realized how much of the world's madness found order simply because he refused to stand up for it. Maybe that was his real trick, taming chaos by sitting still. After a while, Fritz announced dinner. Wolfe rose heavily, smoothed his vest, and said, "I trust you will not be serving wine." "Of course not, sir," Fritz said. Wolfe paused halfway to the door, turned slightly toward me and said, "Archie, man's appetite is his virtue and his vice. When either grows too strong, it poisons him. Remember that." Then he disappeared toward the dining room, the sound of his steps fading into the soft hush that only the brownstone could make. I stayed behind a moment longer, staring at the empty glass on the desk, the one from that first crate of counterfeit Chianti. It caught the last light of evening, glinting red at the base like the echo of a case that refused to die quietly. I finished my notes, shut the book, and looked toward the hall. The world outside was already busy forgetting Don Cesare Montelupo, but I had a feeling Wolfe wouldn't. Neither, maybe, would I. Because some cases don't end when the culprit's caught or the body's buried. They end when the last echo of deceit finally stops ringing in the walls. It's 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 ringing in the walls.